everybody, it's Marilyn Wilson here from RE Technology and Wave Group, and really excited to talk to you today about a topic that, something that really, I like those kind of tools and technologies that just kind of make sense. They make it easier for people to work together and do business together and to innovate. And so MLS Grid is one of those things today. So we're going to talk about lots of different ways that MLS Grid is helping to raise the bar in MLS data services. And we've got some great people to talk about that today. I'm going to introduce you. First, we've got Joseph Sergey. He is the CEO of MLS Grid, chief cook and bottle washer, who laughed earlier about us and told us before he was in real estate, he had a full head of hair. It's been kind of a crazy few years for him. We've got Dan Troop. He's the head of data operations and strategy for Remax Corporate. So he works with hundreds of MLS data feeds. He's going to tell us about that. Mark Hill is the chief operating officer for RealTrax in Tennessee. And then, of course, I'm the managing partner for Wave Group and the president of RE Technology. So welcome to all of our panelists today. Thanks, guys, for being here. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so I thought what I'd first do is, there's data. I think the whole concept of data distribution and stuff, there's so many different layers to it. And some of it gets very technical, and frankly, we're not going to get that technical today because frankly, it's probably not what we want to talk about today, but it's a really, really important topic because MLS services are really, and data services are the heart of what MLSs do. And it's not easy. It gets more and more difficult all the time. There's so many formats to think about. Where does RESO play in it? More and more tech companies looking for, the easy button, so to speak. I've been at conferences where young prop tech companies are just mad at us because they think we make it too difficult to get them data. So we're going to talk today about, some really smart thinking and execution. And frankly, a lot of really smart MLSs across the country are already fully leveraging this. So I wanted to kind of just set that stage. But we did a data services survey back in early 2020. And I wanted to share some of that with you because I think it really plays into what Joseph and his team have built and kind of the reasons behind the reasons that they've built it. So we asked people about, where do you get your data sources from today? So 58% of them are getting it, some from sort of third-party sources like MLS Grid and Bridge and Trustle and others. Still about a third are getting it directly from the MLS, and then just 11% are getting it from third parties solely right now. And yet you'll see in the data that there's kind of a push by people that work with data to push over to that sort of one-stop shop sort of source. So, we asked them first, how much do you believe that to have one source for multiple types of real estate data in multiple markets of real estate data is important? And more than 2/3 of them actually believe that that's really important. And just 7% said that wasn't valuable. So it's a really important need. And just to clarify, the people in this survey were technology companies and brokerages that get data from MLSs around the country. And 64% prefer that data from one centralized source. They just think it's a lot easier. And we're going to hear from Dan how he kind of agrees with that from the work that he's been doing. And why is it that people want that centralized source? Well, number one is just easier. Once you've sort of perfected that one data feed, you know what's in it, you know where to go to get approval on it, and you use the same, everything's simpler, right? And the idea of one, online form to get everything approved. I don't have to chase people around. I don't have to find the number. Here's one dumb thing that happens a lot that slows people down is a lot of times, unless you are a member of the MLS, you cannot get access to the place to ask for a data feed. So if I'm a brand new technology company or even not a brand new technology company and I don't have a direct local relationship, how do I even get to ask someone, right? It gets really crazy. And then, of course, just simple things like time and paperwork. We were laughing earlier. Many of us on the call have kids in college, and there's this thing called the Common App, which if any of you have college, you know what I'm talking about. And what that thing did is it let you fill out the data one time, and then you just push it to a bunch of different schools, right? That's basically what we're talking about doing here. It just makes it easier for everybody. And so why do people like that single source? Well, they believe that it speeds it up. It simplifies data aggregation. You don't have to keep reinventing and remapping. And Dan was going to talk to us about some significant money they spent to simplify mapping. And it just, bottom line, even if you know nothing about technology, if I get it once, I click, and I get it to a bunch of markets, it's a lot easier. That's the simplest definition of it. And then 71%, almost three quarters of them want one licensing data approval form. Why would I have to lawyer 600 different documents that are kind of almost the same, but not exactly the same, just enough that I have to get my attorney to look at it. And it just costs time and money, right? So where can we find ways to collaborate together as MLSs that really create win-wins, right? Is your data licensing form the thing that makes your secret sauce and makes your MLS better than another one? I would argue probably not, right? What does? It's the service you provide, it's the support you provide, it's the ease of people like Dan being able to work with you that are really what make you important and valuable, right? So things like that. So people are looking for can you just simplify this stuff, guys? I got so much work to do. Not to mention I have to spend a lot of money to get data. I just want it to be easier. That's the bottom line. Okay. It's nothing brain surgery here. It's just, can we make it simpler? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Joseph. And if you can tell us kind of the vision, not the vision, but the reality of how this is playing out and how it sort of ties into what people that are buying MLS data services today are asking for.
Sure. Well, about 2.5, almost 3 years ago, a group of like-minded MLS, 7 MLS in the Midwest, primarily in the Midwest, were looking for a solution to the data services quandary. We have redundant services in place. We're doing the same licensing repetitively. We're doing the same compliance repetitively. We have brokers that exist across all of our different MLS in multiple markets, and they're gathering the data from multiple locations. And wouldn't it just be simpler to have one organization spearhead that for us? One access point, one point of licensing, one point of compliance, one standardized compliance process, one payment point, and one data access point. So with that in mind, they wanted to build the MLS Grid. Today we are 10, 11, 12 MLSs now across the nation, everywhere from Northwest MLS in Seattle, Washington, all the way down to Stellar MLS in Orlando, Florida. The idea and the concept is a collaborative effort amongst the MLS to provide data services for vendors and brokers, remove those redundancies that I talked about. Having one data license agreement that's commonly negotiated amongst the MLSs allows us to provide vendors easy access across multiple markets without, as Marilyn said, without having to have a lawyer wordsmith it over and over and over again. Our uniform compliance process ensures that if you have a display standard issue, it can be corrected once for multiple markets. And so what holds true in Chicago holds true in Charlotte, North Carolina, in terms of your IDX display and usage. And with that in mind, we've been able to streamline that licensing process, growing over the course of the last 2.5 years to service a little over 535 vendors and brokers across the nation, and powering a little over 13,000 different websites across the nation.
Gotcha. And can I ask you to clarify a little, because the word compliance means a lot of different things in our industry. When you talk about compliance, you're not talking about, hey, I entered a field incorrectly, or you're talking about, right? Talk about what you mean by this kind of compliance, because it's
not listing compliance that will always be performed by the MLS themselves. It's the broker's data, and it belongs to their subscribers, and they know the data better than anyone else. We're talking about compliance in regards to IDX display compliance, VOW compliance. Is the data being used properly? Are we sharing access tokens? Is the data being snuck out the back door and hidden somewhere? That's the type of compliance that we help collaboratively manage for the MLSs, and in some cases perform for them themselves.
So if you see an IDX vendor or anybody that's taken the data and done something incorrect in one market, you can quickly let everyone, you'd probably check it for other markets too, and then you can let all the other MLSs know that, hey, you might want to check this out.
Right. It has a ripple effect. Essentially, if you catch something non-compliant with a particular website or vendor in Seattle, you can compel compliance not just in that one market, but in 9, 10 other markets across the nation. And that has greater degree of power in getting that vendor to take your issue seriously and compels them to make the change faster and accurate. And then knowing that you have so many different pairs of eyes watching you at that point means you're less likely to see that compliance issue pop up again.
So you're kind of grouping together, there's a kind of a community effort to police the internet, not just one. And I know, MLSs that we work with, that is a lot of work, and frankly, an almost impossible task to stay on top of it on a daily, because it's like kind of like whack-a-moles, right? You get something under control and you go out the next day and it might be back there, or it might be somebody else that's doing the same thing. So that's a significant time savings from what I hear. Mark will talk about that in a little bit. Okay. Let's see what else. So tell us a little bit kind of the features of this thing, just at a top level, and then we're going to jump into some questions with
sure.
Dan and Mark.
So what we at the MLS Grid are is we're your single data source for data downstream from the MLS. We take the data directly from the MLS. We convert it as close as humanly possible to the RESO data dictionary. We don't lose any data in that conversion process. Any localized fields, any fields that are important to your region, to your MLS, and to your subscribers is not lost. We're repackaging the data that exists in your MLS today to a RESO standard, and we're changing the way that it's delivered from RETS to the RESO API, which is what NAR and RESO is pushing this industry to do. RETS is a aging, at best, 25-year-old technology. And it's a classic, but in that regard, with the classic, you don't have all the bells and whistles and features that you need today as technology is moving forward at a rapid rate. It's a consolidated database, meaning we're bringing the data together into one locale so that vendors and brokers can access it from one place, but it's not a data share. It doesn't mean that just because you're a member of the MLS Grid or a broker in Chicago has access to your listings from Nashville, Tennessee. Usual rules still apply. You have to be a member participant of that MLS to have access to that MLS's data. To simplify that process and manage it all online, we created, negotiating with each of our MLS partners, a standardized data license agreement. One agreement that covers all use cases, one agreement that efficiently helps the vendor and broker navigate this process without asking the same question over and over again, or examining with a microscope one particular clause in an agreement with an attorney charging hundreds of dollars an hour to tell you the same thing over and over again. And then having that standardized set of rules and compliance makes it so much easier from a vendor and a broker standpoint. The expectation is set out the gate of what the MLS requires of you. And so you're not likely to get a phone call that's confusing in the middle of the night that says that your website is non-compliant in Charlotte, North Carolina, but you're confused because you're completely compliant in Chicago, Illinois.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I think that's an important point that you brought out. Just because the data all ends up in again, I'm going to use non-technical terms, in one big bucket, doesn't mean we all get to have everybody else's buckets, right? It's just, all this is a way to simplify the process. It doesn't mean that there's any other data access that's being provided other than what the MLS would normally do and the MLS would ask for. Okay. You have a question already from Gregor asking, do you get the entire MLS feed, or does it have to be approved broker by broker?
We get the entire MLS feed in most cases. It's not an opt-in, and that's so that we can provide both IDX, VOW, back office, and the soon-to-be released participant data feed, the MyDX feed. You can release that data to us in stages, starting with IDX and working your way up to VOW and back office. But obviously, it's better if we have the entirety of it to start with, because it makes it easier to roll out the services collectively to your vendor and broker participants, rather than piecemeal.
Like you requested an IDX feed from a local MLS. It's the same thing. It's a standardized version, right? It's
the same data that you get from the MLS today. The difference is that if we can translate it to the RESO data dictionary standard, we do. If we can't, it remains in place. Same data, same fields of information, same values, because we know your brokers expect that data to be part of their feed.
And you said it, but I think probably bears repeating that. I'll use an example. Like we work with some folks in Louisiana. No one else in the world has parishes except Louisiana. And that is completely possible with MLS Grid. If you have local unique nuances, like in Florida, where they need 42 descriptions of the depth of a canal where your boat goes, right? That is all still possible with this, right?
Yeah, all the regional nuances that have to remain, all real estate is local. And so that local information that makes it important to those customers and to those brokers, that remains in place.
Got it. Okay, good. All right. So maybe we can talk a little bit about this. So, why should an MLS that's looking at this today participate in the MLS Grid?
Well, I think that what's most important is that MLSs today are preparing themselves for the future, and the future is the API. So if you're not on track to implement a RESO data dictionary, a RESO approved API, you need to be thinking about that. You can do that in a myriad of ways. The MLS Grid is one of them. It happens to be a collaborative effort of like-minded MLSs that have come together to ensure that the needs of the industry are met, and that we put our participants, our member participants at the MLS level, and the vendors first, getting the data to them efficiently, securely, safely, but getting the data to them so that they can innovate and provide the services that brokers need to service their clients, their customers. We're managed by MLSs at this time, and we continue to use our board of managers, which runs the gambit of CEOs from across the nation, to provide valuable influence, in our vision and where we choose to go in the future, staying on the cusp of what RESO requires and what NAR requires. And because it's a collaborative effort, we're leveraging that groupthink and economies of scale. We currently represent a little over, I think, almost 300,000 realtors across the 12 MLSs that are part of our network. We can leverage that economy of scale to work with vendors to get better compliance, to work with vendors to provide better quality of service to real estate practitioners, and to power their business more efficiently.
Awesome. So there's a couple of questions coming in, and I think part of this webinar is part of the answer to this, but what's the roadmap to get more MLSs into MLS Grid? Do you want to talk about that, Joseph?
Part of the roadmap is getting the message out. We've spent the last 2.5 years building what we think is a great foundation for growth and expansion in terms of the MLS Grid network. We want to include more MLSs in our network. The power of adding more MLSs, that collaboration will increase that ripple effect I talked about earlier. And I believe the phrase is, a rising tide lifts all boats. I think that's very true. I think if we can have more like-minded MLSs participate in something that is driven not from a revenue standpoint, but driven from a driving the industry to adopt the technology that's necessary to help it flourish, we're all going to be better off for it.
Yeah, I'm with the barrage of news that's happening lately. I'm hearing from a lot of MLSs that they like the idea that they're kind of I hate the word control because it just sounds so limiting, but kind of driving their own destiny and doing it with peers, right? It's like it's a bunch of MLSs that all think the same, do the same, act the same, but may need different levels of support in different areas, and so you can work together to basically makes your staff go further, for lack of a better definition. That's what I'm hearing from some folks. We're getting a few questions, and I want to go quickly on this because this isn't a definition of data feeds, but there's a couple questions about what's the difference between a VOW IDX and a MyDX. Do you want to take that, Joseph, just real quick?
Well, I mean, the easiest explanation is IDX is what, you display to the consumer listings that are for sale, pending, or recently closed, and the consumer, I call it window shops, to see what's happening in their area. The idea is to hopefully gather a lead, showcasing these properties for sale, and hopefully represent a customer in one of these transactions. VOW is the virtual office website. That offers a brokerage the opportunity to operate outside of your regular brick and mortar shop. You can conduct your business completely online. It comes with a greater degree of scrutiny because you get a greater amount of data, including some off-market statuses. NAR has set a firm foundation on the rules that kind of govern VOW. And I look at it as IDX plus, but with a greater degree of restriction in place to obviously make sure the data is not misused. MyDX is, I guess, the colloquial phrase people are using right now for this participant data access policy that NAR just recently passed. Essentially, a broker is allowed to have a feed of all their data and information from the MLS at cost, and the broker can designate that data either to be sent to himself or to be sent to any other participant for use to benefit that broker and his business.
We had just had a brokerage pull their MyDX feed, if you will, and they were able to secure 19 years of history out of the data feed. So depending on how much storage your MLS has, you can get years and years and years of valuable insight. And they were able to take it and move it into some of their own market analysis platforms. And they were also going to use it to repopulate in another MLS that they wanted to join in addition. So there's lots of different ways to use that MyDX thing. That's a brand new concept. Okay, what else? So yeah, I think that was kind of just the overview. Thank you so much for the questions, and keep them coming as we talk, because I'm sure Dan and Mark might stimulate some ideas for you too. So again, we've got Dan Troop, Data Operations and Strategy from RE/MAX, and then Mark Hill from RealTrax. I'm going to start with you, Dan. So tell me, what is your role within RE/MAX, and how many data feeds are you working with on a regular basis?
Thanks for having me on, Marilyn. As my title, Director of Data Operations, I work with the team who, we have a pretty large team within RE/MAX who's dealing with vendors such as MLS Grid and all the MLS vendors to download this data on a, I think right now we're at a 15-minute basis with our MLS data. So approximately 460 plus MLS feeds in the US, plus this next year we're taking on Canada. That we all to power to remax.com. That's our ultimate goal.
And for those that don't know, and I'll brag for you, Dan, remax.com is one of the top 10 sites in America. It's a very, very strong website. So the quality of the data and the depth and breadth of the data, I'm sure, makes it more indexable and more exciting every day, right, Dan? The more you get, the better it gets.
Yeah, and RE/MAX just went through a transition period, right? We were always hiring this out. We decided to bring this in-house. So we're new to this game as well. Not new to the IDX game. We've been in that game for a long time. We're new to it of handling this on our own, and dealing with all the vendor partners out there, dealing with all the MLSs. We definitely have a good idea of the different options that are out there, from the vendors that are supplying that data to us, or whether or not they're using a platform such as Trestle or Grid or Spark to provide that data to us as well. So we kind of have a good idea of all of that, and probably not the ideal person that an MLS is dealing with that has access to all of those at once, but probably can give a good review of the different ones that are out there.
So tell us the good, bad, and the ugly, because I know Dan, for any of you that go to RESO, you know that Dan has been probably for many years was like the only broker in the room at RESO. He was like the voice of the broker. But what have you learned getting closer and closer to this thing? And do you see why MLS Grid makes sense? Because you're the end. It's the buck stops with folks like you. Tell us why this makes any sense, or if it does.
I'll try to talk to it, since I'm a vendor and broker. I'll try to talk to it in the vendor voice as well as the broker voice. Okay. I think I'll start out with the broker voice first, and I'll try to stay away from the ugly. I don't want to focus on the ugly. I want to focus on the good.
Oh, come on, Dan, that's more fun.
Plenty of RESO meetings. You can go back and review the tape of the ugly. From the broker's perspective, as someone who represents brokers, really about enticing more technology companies to get into this space, right? Ultimately means more options for agents and brokers from a technology perspective. Like the MLS Grid, which is really well documented, to move into those markets and be able to download the data and access the data, to be able to bring products and create these competitive marketplaces, bring the tools to the agents. So in that part, well, brokers, it's hard for them to get to join RESO. It's hard for them to back these kind of things because it's so indirect that they don't feel this, right? But as a vendor, we really feel it, right? We really feel the difference between the MLS Grid and talking to an MLS directly. And really, even though RESO has done a fantastic job with standards and the data dictionary and developing those standards, in fact, Remax wouldn't have been able to go live without it. We internally, we use OUID, we use the data dictionary standard. We're using a lot of these standards that were created, so thank you, RESO, for that. But what we find is, as MLSs implement these standards, they all do it slightly different, just enough to cause heartache when you try to implement this at the nationwide scale. I think what the grid brings here too is that next level. MLSs, we still deal with different paperwork in different MLSs, right? So us taking this on ourselves, we've collected over 15,000 signatures in the past 2 years of different forms of paperwork. I can't tell you how many Skinner forms I've seen. Mitch Skinner, I don't know if he's on this or not, but I've seen enough Skinner forms to make you puke. And so, and I can spot a Skinner form from anywhere. We laugh about that at RESO. So it's not only that, it's a paperwork process. So right away, the grid simplifies that for us, right? The second thing is the challenge once we get the paperwork in place is bringing that data in-house. So looking at what is the transport method? Are we gonna have to do RETs? Are we gonna have to do web API? Thank goodness, out of the 460, we have 0 FTP. I don't know if we should be celebrating that as an industry, that we've gotten off FTP. We probably shouldn't be clapping about that, but I think Mark will tell you he still provides FTP to a couple people. So from a transport perspective, all of them are a little bit different, right? The authentication is a little bit different. We do find it's generally the same around the vendor. So if you're looking at CoreLogic, you're looking at Flex MLS, you're looking at Navica, those tend to be very similar and we can use those. So the grid simplifies that. It's one for all of these that we write to. So we call those our connectors we're writing the data to. I'll throw this third one is the support too, right? For me to be able to call up Joseph, call up his team and say, you know, that affects a bunch of markets is very helpful for us. But the final piece that no one else has done, and I think that where the MLS grid really is different, is the rules, right? No one else has simplified it to the level that they've simplified it. They've added that extra piece that I think makes a huge difference. When we look at our rules engine, it's insane. The amount of rules that we have to manage per MLS across the country is difficult, and the paperwork is difficult. So I would say the positives from a vendor perspective, when I'm looking at it, it's one logo across all those MLSs. I have to manage all these MLS logos. It's one disclosure across all these MLSs. I don't have to manage those anymore. So kudos to the grid and those MLSs that do join that. We're looking at someone like Northwest MLS. I'm thankful they joined the grid. They have a very unique connector we would have had to build to tap into that, and we didn't have to deal with that. Probably saved us a good 8 sprints or so, not having to write a new connector. That's money back in our pocket.
So Dan, when we were doing our prep call, you mentioned that you guys built a mapping tool. I don't know if you want to share the dollars with the public, but can you talk about why you did that and how much energy it took for Remax to be able to simplify the process of mapping from 400 and whatever it is plus number of MLSs?
Yeah, to build a nationwide portal, you have to normalize the data, right? Beds and bats and square footage all have to be called the same thing internally for us. So we mapped it all to the data dictionary. We were expecting a lot more feeds to come in data dictionary certified. That just wasn't the case. When we called up and asked for RETs feeds, the odds of us getting a data dictionary one were very, very slim. So we had to create a mapping tool. We mapped over 1 million fields in the past 2 years.
Wow.
It's crazy. So we built a tool internally that manages our mapping of fields to try to normalize all these data sets across. And we're doing some analysis now on how good we normalize that. And we do see, it's quick for our team to make changes now that we have that mapping tool, that internal tool we call props. So our team can quickly go in, make a mapping change, rerun the index, and we can reprocess an MLS very quickly.
So not to put you on the spot, but just, we don't have to give the details of this, but this was not thousands or hundreds of thousands. This was this tool cost you millions to build, right?
Yes, if data dictionary was actually implemented, I think across nationwide, it probably would have saved us a good $3 million.
So this is real money we're talking about here, guys. And this is just one brokerage, right? I mean, certainly a very well respected and large one, but nonetheless, just one. We work with hundreds of thousands of them across, right? So it's kind of interesting.
So Joseph gets to do that job for us. he gets to pre-map it. So we have pretty much one mapping file for MLS Grid, because it all comes in a very well done, normalized fashion. It's like writing to one MLS basically for us. So anytime someone chooses to join the grid, it's a quick transition for us. And like I said, Northwest, it would have taken us a while to implement Northwest MLS without the grid.
That's awesome. I'm going to ask you a tough question, and you can choose to say I have no comment if you'd like. But as we know in our market, real estate, if there's anything we know, is it's never going to be the same for more than 15 minutes, right? So just recently, we've had some pretty big shifts with, Zillow becoming a brokerage. They're the ones that own Bridge, and CoreLogic is still independent, but it seems like a lot of people sniffing around trying to buy them. And they own Trestle. So, what's your feeling about MLSs, working with something like this that's sort of, managed by MLSs? And I guess two questions. That's the first one. The second one is, do you think ideally MLSs offer one of these data distribution solutions, two, three? What's your sense of that as somebody that's trying to leverage the data in your business?
First, my comments on Zillow getting into IDX. Welcome, finally. They feel the pain we have to feel. I don't know why. I know why they're doing it, right? Their hands being forced a little bit in some markets where they have to become a broker, but they're feeling it, right? They're feeling the pain that we feel to have to meet these display rules, right? They didn't have to do that prior, so now they're trying to do it on their end, and I feel for them. It's difficult. Hopefully, they have a lot of power in the industry, I feel like, and hopefully they'll bring some sense to it a little bit and bring their voice to it to say, this is crazy. We do feel some of the rules are a little bit odd that we have to follow and may not be consumer centric, but to really focus on the rules and say, does the consumer really care what your logo looks like? Does the consumer really care about the disclosure statement and how long it is? So really start to look at those and really make sense of those, and does the consumer care? So from that side, I think Zillow brings a large voice to the table, and hopefully that'll help the broker in the end. What was the second part? I apologize. No,
Okay.
You distracted me on the Zillow one.
Yeah, the second question is, do you think that MLSs should think about, right now, some MLSs just
multiple solutions, yes.
Right, should they think about offering Trestle and Bridge and MLS Grid, just one of the three? And what you're thinking on that as someone that works with all of those tools around the country?
Mark's going to be a perfect one to answer this question for you, and he's going to have a different opinion. As a vendor who downloads it, of course, I want you to keep FTP up as long if that's what my system runs. If my system only runs RETs, of course I want you to keep RETs and also offer Grid out there. But if I'm sitting in Mark's seat, I'm gonna let Mark comment on that. I'm sure Mark's gonna say that there's one solution, because we know it's a pain point for MLSs to deal with guys like myself and Remax and all these people that bug them and get in trouble and do the wrong thing. But hopefully also, they see it as someone they can communicate with to understand, the relationship we have with MLS Grid. Hopefully Joseph sees it this way. It's a two-way communication, right? Like, we're going to make this change. Is that going to affect you? And how much is that going to affect you? And we're thinking about this, would it make it easier on you? Would it make it harder on you? So that's how I view my relationships with the MLSs. And that's how I hope that they are continuing going forward. Whether or not an MLS wants to provide multiple solutions, I think Mark's better to answer that question.
Gotcha. Okay. Let's see if there's anything else. All right. So I guess just the bottom line of it all is, getting none of the details away. Does MLS Grid, are we moving in the right direction as an industry with things like this? Is this really where you, as someone that wants to roll up Canada and wants to roll up the United States and, many, and with multiple data solutions, right? Not just one, it's not just your website. I'm sure there's other tools that you're using data for as well, right?
Yeah, we've definitely come a long ways. When I look back, when I was 15 years ago, when I started working in a lot of them were FTP feeds, right? And RETs was really starting to get off the ground. And, we have come a long ways from that. I don't think we have a tech challenge as much as we have a policy, paperwork, compliancy challenge that is going to be much harder to get over because everything, as Joseph has said, is local and everyone
Right.
wants it a certain way local. I wouldn't assume MLSs would make decisions based upon what Remax wants, even though Remax does have a large membership. We're probably not the main client in that case because the main client's probably only doing 1 to 2 MLSs for that local market. On the national scale, which we do it, I can tell you compliance is a pain in the butt. But if you're just one MLS that has one set of rules, it looks very narrow focused to you. But I think from a consumer perspective, starting to think about it from a consumer perspective, we probably could relax a little bit on some of the display requirements that we have and start to remove some of those major requirements that are there from a policy standpoint. From a tech standpoint, I still think there is work to be done. Specifically when we look at hiring people and hiring staff of understanding what RETS is versus web API, it's much easier to have a conversation of a RESTful interface that's, OData compliant. Like people know what that means, right, in our space.
So if you had your Dan Troop magic wand, would you magically get rid of RETS and go move exclusively to API?
Wow, that's a tough one. I think web API is still a little young, and from a replication standpoint, and RETS is well established in that space. So from a safety perspective, I still feel comfortable with RETS, specifically in areas where we don't get all statuses, right? So listings just disappear from our feed. We don't know where they went. So we have to do this exchange to try to figure out what's missing and remove it from our site. RETS has well-established rules on how we can do that synchronization. Where Web API hasn't fully baked that, and everyone does a replication a little bit different. So I would say that Web API's got a little ways to go on that, and RETS is a little bit more comfortable in that space when the industry is still fully replicating data.
And the new rule that just was approved by MLS or by NAR just a couple of weeks ago basically requires the depth and breadth of data available in the API to be the same as RETS. Am I correct about that, Joseph?
Yeah, that's 100% correct. The rule is you have to provide through this feed exactly what is in the MLS database, no less than.
Right. So that's going to hopefully by the end of 2021, we're going to be in good shape on that issue. And the replication might be a different issue, but at least in terms of breadth of data, it should be consistent. We've got a couple of questions on that too, that people have run into that where they wanted to use the API, but it didn't have all the data they needed. So that hopefully that's going to get fixed. So let's turn it over to Mark. Thanks so much, Dan. I may jump back to you with questions, but thanks so much for sharing your perspective. Mark is the COO for RealTrax. And Mark, you're the, tell us, why did RealTrax decide to be, I think it seems like you're kind of one of the drivers of this idea, but why did you decide to become part of the MLS Grid? When you looked at the landscape, why did you think that the industry needed MLS Grid?
It just made sense. I think either you or Joseph mentioned earlier, none of us are really hanging our value propositions on our compliance with data and our website checks and things like that. There's just when you pull those resources, there's just so much advantage to it. As Joseph mentioned, collectivized or centralized, compliance and data management and licensing, a unified data feed. It just made sense, and it solved a great deal of pain points for a lot of duplicate costs that we were all incurring.
Gotcha. And what have you gotten back from vendors? I know sometimes when we try to rip Band-Aids off, it's not so fun, but what have the vendors told you about this? Do they appreciate the move that you're making?
For the most part, Dan's laughing. I'm sure we had conversations early on. But I'll be honest with you, it was overwhelmingly, it was positive. Now, there were some existing RETS vendors. It's never going to be easy. You heard me say yesterday, nobody likes uncompensated change.
Right.
And this is definitely one of those. But it's as I mentioned, it's some short-term pain for I think what's going to be long-term benefit. I do think the API is going to have to mature a little bit more for it to be perfect, if you will. But, it took RETS a lot of years to do the same thing.
Right.
But if we wait for just pure perfection, we'll be sitting here talking about it 5 or 10 years from now. So it just made sense for us to move forward and as you said, rip the Band-Aid off. And that's what we did. We did it in January of 2019. We put out an edict, if you will, that said, hey, we're moving off RETS in 5 months. And nobody took us serious. And so this is what I mentioned yesterday. 2 weeks later, the second email said, look, we weren't kidding. We're really going to web API. And that got some attention. But, we didn't just give a directive of, hey, we're moving to API. There was a lot of communication, which is a prerequisite. You've got to communicate constantly with vendors and brokers. You've got to give them the resources they need. Grid was huge in providing a great deal of documentation and SOPs, things of that nature. We provided a translation document, which proved to be invaluable. So it's just, if you give them the tools, you can make the Band-Aid come off way easier.
Well, and I've got to believe now with 12 MLSs that are either live or going live with this, pretty much every one of the large technology companies, the IDX type companies and market stats companies, they've already had to do this in at least one market, if not more, right?
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
like,
I don't know the exact, Joseph, you could speak to that better. I don't know the exact number, but of how many vendors, if you will, are with multiple brokerages, but I know it's several dozen.
We've got 536 vendors and brokerages, and of that number, we've got a little over 140 that pull from multiple MLS markets. So there's quite a lot of familiarity there.
So those 140, if you said in your new market, that those on the call, we're going to make that change, they're like, okay, I already know how to do this, right? That's the good news. You guys felt the pain on behalf of everyone, right? So now it's a lot easier. If you're market 13, 14, or 27 or 150,
Right.
It's going to be a lot easier.
Yeah, that's the great thing about it. Once you map it, you've pretty well done the majority of your work, less any custom fields that a local MLS might have.
Yeah.
But the lion's share of what you need to do is already done.
So let's just talk reality of your day-to-day life with MLS Grid or before MLS Grid. How has it changed? Because you manage all the data services for RealTracks today, right?
Correct.
So what does your day-to-day life look different from because you're part of MLS Grid? How has it helped you or hurt you, or what's the difference?
So as we were talking yesterday, most MLSs have a data department of one or a fraction of one. I was that fraction of one for a lot of years. If before my percentage of time spent dealing with data feeds was 75, 80%, now it's probably less than 10.
Wow.
And that's probably high. It's probably not that much, because when I approve a data feed from MLS Grid, it's 30, 45 seconds worth of checks to make sure they're a member, hit a button, and it's done. Whereas before you did a lot of other checks and things like that. It's just so much more streamlined now. I don't have to worry about the compliance issue of it. I don't have to worry about the licensing issue of it. As far as the MLS goes, it was almost like freeing up a staff person, which in essence it was.
Gotcha. And so Joseph, maybe you can unmute for a second. So what role are you taking on so that Mark doesn't have to?
Well, part of it is that I think Dan spoke to this earlier, we've documented everything.
And not just Mark, but
yeah, we've documented everything. We've tried to simplify everything to the point where we provide to the vendor and the broker essentially 3 pages of this is how you consume the data. And then we make ourselves available to help coach and teach and walk them through the change from RETS to API. Dan mentioned, RETS, 25 years in, RETS is very well established, but it also comes with what I like to call RETS muscle memory. This is the way that, we perform. This is the way my application performs on RETS. API has very similar things in place, but it's not exact one-to-one. And so we need to be there to support the brokers and the vendors through this transition so that eventually they can make a smooth transition, consume that data, and then grow their market or grow their application by moving on to our other participating MLSs. You can roll something out in one MLS market and have the security of knowing that you can roll it out in other MLS Grid markets with very little development time needed to make the change to adjust to it. Like Mark said, once you've mapped to the MLS Grid, the major difference MLS to MLS is only those fields that are local, that means something to that MLS in its specific region. The rest of it, we've shouldered that burden for you already.
So Mark, I'm going to ask you voice of reality about MLSs, right? So, Dan mentioned this isn't really a technology challenge anymore. It's more of a policy and, shall I say it, a local pride ownership issue that, well, we've always said it this way, and this is, our brokers will get confused if we don't say it that way and things like that. So let's talk about each component. How big a deal was it to have whatever number of MLSs, 10 MLSs, get together to create one standardized licensing agreement? Was there tons of compromises that needed to be made, or was it like, 2 inches off of what everybody did and it was like, yeah, let's just come together and make it one?
It was really close when everybody came in. I mean, IDX rules were always really similar. There were little nuances here and there. I've mentioned one that we dealt with earlier, where our old thumbnail display rules used to dictate we could only have 5 fields displayed. I think Grid went to 8. And we were to the point of, who cares? Between 5 and 8 fields, we would never think about holding up such an important initiative for 3 data fields on a thumbnail. That's not going to make or break or give us any sort of value proposition. So we're not so proud of our rules that we think they can't be adjusted. And the important thing with Grid to remember is it's a collective of as Joseph said, like-minded MLS. It's a partnership, if you will. I'm not speaking to the business part of it, but it is
right.
MLSs working together. So if it works for one MLS and it makes sense for one MLS, odds are it's going to make sense for the other 11 or 12. So it's important, and I always stress, don't think of MLS Grid as a vendor. Think of MLS Grid as a group of MLS colleagues who are just trying to better the services they provide. I think that's important, a really important distinction.
So it's kind of like you're extending your staff to people around the country, but they're all like-minded MLSs. They're not for-profit driven technology companies that may or may not understand what it's like to sit in your seat, because it's a very different seat than sitting on the other side, for sure.
Right. The whole premise of Grid was solving pain points and not answering to shareholders. There were real problems that we needed to solve, and that's where I think the proof has bared out that that's happened.
So let me ask you another voice of reality question. So there were, again, several MLSs that started this and I think seem pretty excited about where it's going, but now there are MLSs that were not part of the original founders, if you will. And hopefully people on the call today that are considering it. Do you see any difference? Again, I'm going back to politics because this is what always slows us down in real estate, right? Is there kind of like a club of, well, we were the founders, so we're kind of in charge and you just do what we say? Or is it truly a collaboration among everybody, no matter when you joined the organization?
No, it's truly a collaboration. Again, MLS Grid is not so proud of their rules that they're not willing to make adjustments. I think Joseph would agree, at least I hope he would, that the MLS Grid rule set is a living document. And so as other MLSs come on, we're live, we don't pretend to know everything and the best ways to make it work. We just know what's working for us currently. Another MLS could come in and say, hey, we've got a great idea for how you might solve problem A. And if it makes sense for that MLS, there's a really good chance that it's going to work for the group. And that's where we collectively get together and decide if it makes sense and adopt the rule. It's the board of managers have been really, really good about just putting their egos down and to the side and really just solving problems and not letting politics and ego and pride get in the way, which without that, this would have never gotten off the ground. That's
what it sounds like. It sounds like a really good way to work together. So let's just give an example. It's like when Clear Cooperation came around, which is such a fun policy. I know we all love that one. It's probably my absolute favorite. When something like that was, approved by NAR, how did that become part of the rules and regs? Just to give us a quick understanding of, because every market was looking at that a little differently, and everybody, some people were like, I don't even care, I don't even want it in my rules. Others were like, oh my God, it's the most important thing ever. Like, how did you deal with that, display of varied opinions about something like that?
Well, for us, a lot of what Clear Cooperation dealt with was more of our business rules. Didn't deal with as much as far as data goes.
Gotcha.
So it wasn't really an issue for us. Joseph, you may have had a different experience, but for us, it was more internal, again, business rules that dictated how we dealt with it.
Gotcha. Well, here's a question that came in. This is from someone anonymous. As a vendor, we have a difficult time getting the data license signed by all parties, specifically brokers. Does MLS Grid have further plans to expedite the paperwork and approval process? Maybe Joseph, if you want to talk to that.
So the way our approval process works is the vendor would initiate a license request, and we would our system would send an email to the broker with a secure link for them to review and sign the data license agreement. Unfortunately, there are a lot of technology problems we can solve. Spam and an email being misplaced, unfortunately, is one of the ones we constantly deal with. There is the ability in the MLS Grid system for the vendor to track the licensing process. You can see when you sent the email, and you can see when it was signed, and you can see whether or not you're awaiting on MLS approval at that stage of the game. If you come across, and most vendors do this now today, if you find that your broker, your agent is not receiving that email, just reach out to support@mlsgrid.com. We'll see if we can track the email down. We've got a copy of every email we send. We'll be able to tell when it was sent, and if it wasn't delivered, we'll resend it for you.
Perfect. And Mark, kind of final question from you, and I'll ask you for one too, Dan. There's MLSs on here that I'm sure may already have other solutions or are considering adding MLS Grid. What's your advice to them about, bottom line, why is this thing something that they should or shouldn't think about? What is it that's going to make their lives easier? I mean, that's the bottom line. We're trying to get more efficient in our businesses, right? So what advice do you have for them?
It's really, for us, it was a matter of, and Dan mentioned it earlier, thankfully, we don't support FTP anymore. But it's just pick a standard is kind of where we were at. We didn't want to support RETs, and we didn't want to support FTP and MLS Grid, or excuse me, the web API all at once. So for us, it's pick a standard, which we obviously chose web API. But then as to why I would go with Grid, it's again, do you really want to be in the data compliance business? Do you want to be in the data rules business? If so, I would almost ask why. How much benefit is it to your MLS to be in a business like that when you can hand it over to an organization that has just done phenomenal things with it, with MLS Grid, and have that the economies of scale that MLS Grid provides is another big reason. It's just the efficiencies are just from monetary to time to staffing, the whole 9 yards. It's just made sense for us in so many ways, and that's where I would what I would really emphasize is just look at what you're doing now in terms of time and resources and capital, and really run numbers and see where it can benefit you. I think a lot of folks who are thinking about Grid would be really pleasantly surprised at what it could really provide for them.
And so with getting rid of that, I think you said you went from like 75% of your time down to less than 10 or 5 on certain days. What kinds of, more proactive projects have you been able to focus on instead? Like if you freed up time for you, here's the other thing. We don't want to free up so much time that they go, we don't need you anymore. Right? Sure. That's not the goal. But like, what were you able to do that was more customer centric instead?
So what we moved, and this may be good or bad, it depends on what day you ask me. I moved from things like just data compliance to membership compliance to business rules, dealing with strategic expansion. That's been the buzzword for years now, in Real Tracks is no different. Mm-hmm. A lot of rules related things, business operations things, just everything to building maintenance, just all sorts of things where I was so tied up before doing data. There's just been the ability now for us to shift our resources and put them where they're the most efficient. And that's been a lot of my role.
Sounds like you've kind of been able to step above the fray a little bit, like start to
100%.
think about bigger process improvements or better ways to improve service, things like that. So
Right, you're not so stuck in the weeds dealing with the day-to-day. You can really fly at 40,000 feet and really implement, substantive change in that sense because the time is freed up.
that's awesome. Okay, Dan, we're going to let you bring it home, and then there's a few questions. Again, you've got your magic Dan wand now. What would you recommend that MLSs think about or do that's going to make not only the lives of you who are rolling up hundreds of data feeds simpler, but even those that are just, like you say, in 1 or 2 or 3 MLSs?
I'm going to put my broker hat on first.
Okay.
Broker perspective, it's about attracting more talent to your MLS, more products, making it easier for you to say, here's our documentation. I guarantee you a lot of MLSs don't have documentation about RETs on their website.
Okay.
Guarantee you that's the case, right? So majority of MLSs don't even have documentation on how you do RETs. They rely on RESO's documentation to do that.
Okay.
You're going to get documentation, simplification, ability to say, as MLSs, as vendors call MLSs, that's going to bring more vendors into your marketplace, right? And ultimately make your brokers happier.
Okay.
So from that side, it's simplicity. It's going to attract more people into the marketplace.
Okay.
From the vendor perspective, do you really want guys like me calling you? I mean, to be honest, it simplifies my life too, for these MLSs to join a standard that we know works. We already have a connector built for, other MLSs are using it as well. And that's something that saves us time and makes things a little bit easier on us. So that's a very selfish reason though. I mean, I'm not sure MLSs care about the vendor. I think they care more about what Mark is saying, right? Of these vendors are a pain in my butt. Like, how can I make that easier? I think that's going to resonate a little more than what Dan Troop thinks.
Gotcha. Is that true, Mark? Are those vendors a pain in your butt? Is Dan the biggest pain in your butt?
They're honestly not a pain in the butt. It's funny. I know some MLSs almost shy away from it. If you just have conversations, there's so much mutual benefit to be found. It's not hard to deal with. It's just if you're open and honest and transparent with what you're doing, it's no different than what Dan or anybody else would expect. Then there's no issue.
It's just not to be too cliche about it, but it seems for me as a third party like a win-win. MLSs get to do their business, that they get to focus on the things they want to focus on. They outsource the things that really aren't creating any perceived value for the organization. Data's getting there faster, it's simpling, and then Dan's getting what he wants, which is a standardized feed that he can use in multiple markets. So it's seems kind of like a no-brainer to me, but I know nothing is ever that easy, so that's why we have to ask these questions.
But it's that simple. You may or may not know, we're one of the few MLSs, I think, 4 that design our own system. Okay. So we've got a full in-house development team, and so it keeps our development team developing the product, which is who our customers, or what our customers see daily. So our customers aren't going to care if we're refactoring a database behind the scenes to make it work with another product. We're spending our resources and our time and our efforts on the product and the search and the add edits and things like that. So there's true advantage to it, and really
the customer facing pieces of the system, not the back end, because it's like turning on your TV. We don't really care. We just want to know it's got Netflix on it, right?
Right.
Gotcha. Okay, so there's a few questions here, and I appreciate everybody that's hanging with us on this because it's a really good conversation. There's some good clarifications. One for you, Joseph. Does MLS Grid standardize the fees that MLS charge vendors?
No. Each MLS sets their own fees. We just provide a single payment point for the vendor. So rather than you paying your data access fees to 9 or 10 different MLSs, one charge from the MLS Grid, and you let us remit the payment back to the MLS appropriately.
So as an MLS, I still get to charge whatever I want for my data feeds.
As an MLS, it's your data feeds. You're just asking us to manage the process for you. So you set the fees you want. Gotcha.
Okay, good. Because I know sometimes people are like, well, do I have to give it away free now if I'm part of this or whatever? Maxim's asking, is there a way to read historic data, tax data, not only MLS data, but realist and MLS Grid? Not just a realist, but public records, is that part of it?
We can provide any data and information the MLS is licensed to redistribute. They have to be licensed to redistribute it to the MLS Grid, and then by proxy, then we can provide that. Typically, tax data is not something that MLSs are licensed to redistribute,
Okay.
which is why property tax programs like Realist exist.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Wendell's asking, what's the timeline to get, a 400 or 500 of people on this, not just 12? That's a, you have your crystal ball out, Joseph?
That timeline, I mean, in an ideal world, would I love to represent, 200, 300, 400 MLS? Sure. I would like a lot of things, but a timeline for something like that, I mean, we would have to take a look at the possibility. We're not an NAR edict. We are MLSs that are coming together to solve a problem collectively. If you want to help solve that problem, if you want to be part of this group and push the technology forward and make life easier for your vendors and your brokers, and take down these artificial barriers that the customer doesn't see, but that the broker and the vendors unfortunately have to deal with, give us a call. We're happy to talk with you about how you can join the MLS Grid and what we can do to help benefit you.
Yeah, actually, I just put up the contact information for those that want to learn more about this. So it's they should just email you directly, Joseph at mlsgrid.com.
Sure, I'm not bashful.
Yeah, or just call either of the numbers on the 385-429-0606 or your cell directly, 801-244-5742. That is a brave man that puts his cell phone up here when he's supporting technology companies all over the country. Good for you.
The next slide doesn't have my cell phone number on it, does it, Marilyn?
Yeah, it does actually. Is that okay?
Oh, okay. You might want to go to that slide.
I think one thing is important to think about here too is it's real easy to get caught up in the number of MLSs we might support, but how many, I guess in the United States, there's 1.2, 1.3 realtors,
Mm-hmm.
and we're supporting almost a quarter of them.
Exactly.
So that's how I kind of would like to look at that. Is like so many MLSs, might have 20, 30, 40 people in it. But let's look at the total industry that we're supporting, and I think it's substantial.
Well, that's one of the things that, frankly, when I saw the deck from you guys, that I was pleasantly surprised about is I think there may be a perception that you're a lot earlier on in the process than you are. I mean, what did you say, 536 vendors and 300,000 agents and 15 or 14,000 websites? Like this is not a startup. Like this thing is well established. It's working in multiple markets.
So we're just starting. We'll be starting year 3 here in 2021. We may have been a little too silent in our approach, but we're beyond being silent anymore, and we're interested in driving the narrative and moving the industry forward. And the API, I'm a true believer that the web API and RESO standards is the way to go.
Perfect.
Time wise, I think RealTrax has had web API for IDX exclusively now since June of 2019, so it's very well established. And
so when I would guess that when new vendors come in, they don't even ask about RETs, they just want to go right to the API, right? Anybody that's new to the industry, or
we only offer web API.
Yeah, that's great. Nicholas had a question. Would version 2 of the API also include support for searching by sold date?
I don't know if that's one of the fields we're going to allow searching on. I know we're adding additional fields of search,
okay.
But I'd have to get with the development team and compile that list. I know that we're taking version 2 of our API is taking into account the last year's worth of suggestions that we've received from our vendors, and it's designed solely for us to respond to the pain points that you let us know still exist. There's no such thing as negative feedback. If it's constructive, all feedback is positive. So we take any and all suggestions, awesome, and we try to take them into account.
Maxim has another question. Is there a way to access inactive or past listings? When a client calls us, there's no active listing, but we need to see the property's features and details.
That's going to depend largely on what type of data feed you have and whether the MLS allows that. There are certain statuses that are allowable in IDX: active, pending, under contract, closed. But then there are what an MLS may deem to be a confidential status, expired, deleted, etc., that they don't make available in IDX. It's going to be unique to each MLS.
So those statuses can change. They're not all standardized across all 12 markets. The MLS
No, because you have regional laws and rules and regulations. Heartland MLS out of Kansas City is they're non-disclosure.
Right.
Sold data is not made a part of their IDX feed, and that's because locally that's not permitted. But if you're operating a virtual office website, a VOW feed out of Heartland, you will see additional statuses like closed made available.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I think we're actually bored beyond the top of the hour. I appreciate all of you hanging in there and listening to this. And Joseph and Mark and Dan, thank you so much. It's really good to just hear how this stuff really plays out in the real world. And you guys are always there to be really candid. I really appreciate that. So again, if anybody wants to schedule a demo with this or wants to learn more about it, Joseph is on the ready. I'm sure phone's going to be ringing right now, right, Joseph? But email him at joseph@mlsgrid.com or give him a call, 801-244-5742. And he'll be happy to give you a full demo, I guess. What will you do on the demo? Just quick, Joseph.
I can show you, I could spend hours showing you all the different things that we do, but I would focus primarily on what's important to the MLS themselves, which is, how we simplify the licensing and registration process, and how we give you as an MLS the ability to monitor where your data is being transmitted and how it's being used.
And if there's technology companies on the call, they would call you as well if they want to sign up and be one of the.
If they want some assistance in registering for an MLS Grid account and getting started, I would encourage them to give us a call. If you've got technical questions, support@mlsgrid.com. They're more than prepared to answer the questions.
Perfect. All right, guys. Thank you so much. Everyone on the call, have a wonderful holiday. I did wear my red for you all today since I never get to see you or hug you in person anymore, and I'm really sad about that. But you have a great holiday season, everyone, and give Joseph a call. He'll show you how cool this stuff is. So everyone have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.